After completing my 10th class exams in 1979, my father suggested that I go and help my father's uncle and learn astrology. Mathematics being my favorite subject, I learned the calculations. My grandfather taught me how to calculate the inclinations of each planet and how to calculate the Lagna and the meridian center MC, and he gave me some birth charts to draw. Thus, I learned how to draw the birth charts first and showed interest in predictions. So, my grandfather told me some predictions, some of the tips that he usually uses for predictions. And after learning those tips, I documented some of them. I verified with my father. While my father and my grandfather have laid the foundation for me to get interested in astrology, for almost a decade or 2 decades, I didn't show any interest.
Let me explain the rule or give you the rule definition. The rule defines that whenever transit Saturn or transit Jupiter touches or aspects the seventh house or the seventh house lord or natal Venus or the nakshatra owned by the seventh house lord from Rashi Lagna, then then there is a high possibility for the native to get married. Generally, you have to look at the Vimsottari Dasa to make sure whether the Vimsottari Dasa is cooperating or not. And if the native is a female, you should not only look from the Rashi Lagna, you should also look at for the same rule, validate the same rule from the Chandra Lagna too, and see if the Rashi Lagna does not cooperate, does the Chandra from Chandra Lagna, does the rule cooperates and makes the native get married.
Welcome to Sastry Karra's astrological series. This is the series where I'm going to present some new topics and explain you how from an astrological perspective, what's the reason behind it for some of the special events to happen. This is the one of the rules that I would like to explain more in detail. This rule states that whenever transit Saturn or transit Jupiter touches the seventh house for an E2 or a seventh house lord or the nakshatra that is owned by the seventh house lord for a native, then from Rashi Lagna, then there is a possibility for that particular native to get married, provided the Vimsottari Dasa cooperates and there is no other malefic planets obstructing the event to happen. If the native is a male, then you just look only from the Rashi Lagna. If the native is a female, then what you have to do is you have to go back and look at from the Chandra Lagna too. Because for the females, it's not only just the Rashi Lagna that you look at it, you have to look everything from the Chandra Lagna. So when transit Saturn or transit Jupiter touches the seventh house, let me repeat again. When transit Saturn or transit Jupiter touches the seventh house of the native, or the seventh house lord, or Venus, or aspects the seventh house, or aspects the seventh house lord, or aspects the Venus, either from Rashi Lagna or Chandra Lagna. Chandra Lagna is especially only for female natives. Then there is a high possibility for this particular native to get married. So in this, what I'm going to do is to show you 4 or 5 examples to show who those who got married, pick up their natal chart and then get the date of marriage and show you how this rule worked for 4 or 5 of the exam natives. And then I'm going to predict for 2 natives. One is for female, the other is for the male. So I hope you will like this presentation, and if you have anything else, please feel free to let me know. Thank you very much. Now let's go and figure it out. Why are we exclusively mentioning that only 2 transit planets, transit Jupiter and transit Saturn? First and the foremost, let me start with transit Jupiter. Jupiter is the natural ninth and 12th house lord. Ninth is the Dharmasthanamo, and the 12th house, when you are looking at the marriage, then it is the pleasures of bed. So Jupiter is the planet that is the Karaka, or that is the planet that is responsible for a native to follow the Dharma or not follow the Dharma, and to have a pleasures of bed or not to have the pleasures of bed. That's the reason why the Jupiter, transit Jupiter is being picked. So what is the Dharma? Why is Jupiter transit Jupiter being more important when it comes to the marriage? Here what is happening is that Dharma is what Jupiter is now owns it. So when a native wants to follow something as per the dharma of his or her religion, then it is the Jupiter that supports him. If the Jupiter is not afflicted, then the native most of the time follows the dharma. That's what the simple way of explaining the ninth house. And the 12th house is the pleasures of bed. If the native is following the dharma, then the pleasures of bed that the native is supposed to get is through a legitimate, socially accepted function or an event or a sacred activity. So in the Hindu religion, marriage is the fundamental stuff that has to be done for any native to have the pleasures of bed. Also, when it goes to the dharma, according to Hindu mythology or religion, whatever you say it, the primary role or responsibility of the human beings, is to procreate. That's what's the primary. So the dharma for every human is to procreate is the dharma. So the only way that legally or in a society the procreation can be accepted is only after the native gets married. That's the reason why transit Jupiter is being considered as the most important planet when you are looking astrologically for the possibility of the native to get married. Now let's go and look at transit Saturn. Why is transit Saturn that much important when it comes to marriage? Transit Saturn is the natural lord of the 10th and 11th houses. 10th house is Karma Sthanamo. Karma means whatever the karma deeds that you are supposed to do, the native is supposed to do, has to be, the Saturn is the one who decides what are they. And then 11th one is Kamasthanamo. Kamasthanamo means a house of desires. So whatever the desires that the native is supposed to get is decided by Saturn. That's the reason. And the karma, as I said earlier, our procreation is the basic dharma. So does the native perform the dharma properly or not? The other way to look at is to look at Saturn and say that if the native is going to perform his dharma, his or her dharma, then the karma will be good. So Saturn is trying to help the Jupiter here and the native both at the same time, so that the native can follow the dharma and then get good deeds or good karma from whatever the event that has been done. That is, here it is marriage. And the second one is the 11th house. 11th house is Kamasthanamo, or house of desires. So Saturn is the one who is deciding what are the ways that the native can fulfill his or her desires. And to do that, to fulfilling of any sort of a desires, particularly the physical and biological desires, the only way according to the Hindu religion and Hindu mythology, and the way that the society allows for humans to do, is by getting married. So marriage became such an important event in one's life, and that's the reason why you have Saturn here, you have Jupiter here. These two planets, when they are in transit mode, and when they are when they touch the 7th house, which is the Kalatra Sthanamo, or they touch the 7th house lord, or Venus. Venus is the natural Karaka for marriage for both men and women. where either they touch it or they have a direct aspect. This is very important. They have a direct aspect on the seventh house, or the seventh house lord, or Venus, from Rashi Lagna for both men and women. And for female, you have to look at the same thing from Chandra Lagna too. If that particular thing happens, then the transit planets, whatever the duration they are there, you got to check out in the Vimsottari Dasa whether the Mahadasa, the Antardasa and Pratyanta Dasas are supporting for the event to happen. And then you got to go back and see that in the natal chart, are there any negative forces like Kujadosha, for example, in females, or Rahu residing in the 12th house or something like that? Is there anything like that happening, so that the whatever the positive thing that these transit planets want to do to make the native to get married, are there any negative forces that is either reducing this positive force or nullifying the positive force? So first you look at all these, and then you go back, look at the Vamsottari Dasa, and when everything is fine, then you go back and look at the natal chart to see how much intensity of the negative force exists from the natal planets. Based by accumulating all this information, you can come to a conclusion whether the possibility exists or not. If the possibility does exist, what is the percentage of probability for the event to happen? That's how you go and predict the possibility of a native to get married. So use the rule, make sure that the rule is satisfied, then go to Vimsottari Dasa, make sure that the Vimsottari Dasa is cooperating, then go to the natal chart and see that there are no negative forces that is reducing the ability for this event to happen. And then that's when you come forward and tell what is your prediction for that particular native.
Here is the first example for this particular rule to verify whether this rule is correct or not. Let's start looking at the first example. This is the male native born in 1982 and got married in 2012. So when you look at the D1 chart, the Lagnadipati is Moon, and Moon is in the fourth house. That's a very good sign. Moon is in the fourth house, and which is the natural seventh house. Second positive sign. And Moon's direct aspect is on Venus, who is the lord of the fourth house and natural seventh house lord. So the Lagnadipati is so cooperative for this particular native to get married and to have a home life environment. And then comes the next one is the seventh house lord. The seventh house lord is Saturn. Saturn is in the third house. That's okay. For time being, that's okay. Saturn is in the third house, but Saturn has joined with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The fifth house lord Mars in the third house. So Saturn, the seventh house lord, is joined with the fifth house lord. So naturally, when even though the two are malefics, because they both are co-joined at the same that house, they will make sure that the seventh house lord, it's like an friendship. Like the seventh house lord will make sure that the fifth house lord provides stuff, whatever the stuff that the fifth house lord is to provide. Here it is the children, and then the seventh house is marriage. So this particular native, when you look at the chart, it can clearly tell you that the possibility for this particular native to get married is very high. Now let's go and look at this particular chart. That's first case number 1, male who was born in 1982 and got married in 2012, 26th November 2012. First and foremost, what I do is that I go to the Vimsottari Dasa, and when I look at the Vimsottari Dasa, the Mahadasa is Saturn, who is the 7th house lord. The Antardasa is Jupiter, who is the 7th, 8th and 9th house lord. 6th and 9th house lord, and then the Pratyanta Dasa is Mercury, who is the 12th house lord, and then comes Mars. Mars is the 5th house lord. So when you look at it, when you look at it, all the whole Mahadasa system, Mahadasa, Antardasa, Pratyantardasa, and Sukshma all of them are one way or the other related to the marital life for a particular native. As I said, Jupiter is the ninth house lord, which is the Dharmasthanadipati, Dharmasthanamo, and Mercury, the 12th house lord. 12th house deals with pleasures of bed. Mars is the fifth house is children, and above all, the Mahadasa is Saturn, who is the 7th house lord. So the Vimsvatari Dasa is cooperated for this particular native to get married. Now let's go and look at the rule. How can we justify the rule? Transit Saturn, and on the date of his marriage, Transit Saturn is exalted. That's very important here. It's exalted in Libra, where it touched the Lagnadipati Moon, and they both Transit Saturn, the exalted Transit Saturn, is residing in the house owned by Venus, the natural 7th house. Okay, and both Lagnadipati and Transit Saturn, exalted Transit Saturn, they both are having a direct aspect on Venus, who is the house lord for this particular Libra. So the Transit Saturn is having a direct aspect on natal Venus. That's the reason, and I explained you the Vimsvatari Dasa. Let's go now look at Transit Jupiter. Did Transit Jupiter help the native in any way to get married? When you look at it, Transit Jupiter is just residing in the house owned by Venus, who is the natural Karaka. So apart from that, nothing great Jupiter could do it. But Transit Jupiter, while Transit Saturn is initiated and is making the native to get married possible, Transit Jupiter is co-joined with Mercury, the 12th house lord, and the Sun, the 2nd house lord. So here, while exalted Transit Jupiter looking at Venus, natal Venus, and giving the native a possibility to get married, Transit Jupiter is helping the native to get the pleasures of bed and start a family. So the two transit planets, Jupiter and Saturn, helped the native to get married during that period. Before we start analyzing whether this particular rule can be justified on this chart, let's just have a quick look at the D1 chart for this female native. The Lagna is Sagittarius. The Lagnadipati is Jupiter. Jupiter is residing in its own house. So the Lagnadipati is residing in first house, and it is having a direct aspect on the 7th house. So the 7th house is very, very strong here because the first house lord is residing in the first house and having a direct aspect on the 7th house. That's the first advantage for this particular native when you look at it. And then the 7th house lord. The 7th house lord is Mercury. 8, 9, 10. 7th and 10th house lord is Mercury, and Mercury is residing in the 10th house itself with the 7th, 8th, with the 9th house lord Sun. 9th house lord Sun, 7th and 10th house lord Mercury are residing in the 10th house. That's a very good sign too. Unfortunately, they both got 7th house lord is co-joined with Rahu. That's something that is a little bit concerned about, and they all are having a direct aspect on the 4th house where Saturn, the 2nd house lord Saturn, is residing. So now that we are only looking at the positive, justifying the possibility of this particular native to get married, let's only look at the rule and something that is close pertaining to that particular rule. This is the second case. The native is a female who got married on September 23rd, 2017. So if you look at it, the first and the foremost you look at is on September 23rd, 2017, where are the two transit planets? Transit Saturn is in Scorpio, and the inclination of Transit Saturn was 27 degrees. Approximately 27 degrees. You can take it as 27 degrees. So 27 degrees means it is in a Rasi Shandhi. That means there's no assurance whether the Transit Saturn will respond based on its position in Scorpio, or based on its position in Sagittarius. Since if we consider transit Saturn, the Rashi Sandhi transit Saturn in Sagittarius, then that means it is in the first house. It is having a direct aspect on the seventh house from Rashi Lagna. And then the next thing is transit Jupiter. Transit Jupiter on the date of the marriage, transit Jupiter is in Libra and it is approximately 2 degrees, only just 2 degrees. So if you look at Moon 2 degrees, that means if you look transit Jupiter being in Libra 2 degrees means it is touching natal moon, and natal moon and transit Jupiter are both having a direct aspect on the 7th house from Chandra Lagna. That's the reason why it's a bit difficult to tell exactly when any planet is in a Rashi Sandhi like this. It is very difficult to tell exactly the transit planet from which Rashi is it going to give the result. See, this is the best example to do that one. Now let's go and look at now that we know that both the transit Jupiter and transit Saturn are in Rashi Sandhi. Let's go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa to see whether is that the Vimsottari Dasa that is responsible for this particular native to get married. If you look at it, the Saturn Mahadasa is Saturn. So Saturn is the second house lord residing in the fourth house. So naturally it's something that's related to marital life, second and fourth houses. And then comes Venus, the natural seventh house lord Venus, who is residing in the sixth and who is residing in the eighth house. And then Jupiter is the Lagnadipati and fourth house lord. First and fourth house lord Jupiter is residing in the first house. So even just while transit Jupiter and transit Saturn residing are in Rashi Sandhi and were like not sure which way to go it, the Vimsottari Dasa is the one that has helped the native to conclude it and make this native get married. Let's now take this female chart. The native was born in August 1993, and the Lagnadipati is her sun, and the sun is residing in its own house. So that tells you that the native is very strong and has the characteristics of sun, that is leadership, demanding, and behaves like a leader, all those stuff. And since we are talking about the marriage, let's go and look at the seventh house lord. The seventh house lord is Saturn, and Saturn is residing in the seventh house, in its own house. So the seventh house lord is very strong here, residing in its own house. So what we have to do is, when we are going to predict the possibility for marriage for this particular native, we have to emphasize on Saturn, both the natal Saturn and the transit Saturn, and the Mahadasa. And if the Mahadasa is not Saturn's Mahadasa, then you have to look at the Antardasa or Pratyantardasa or Sukshmantardasa of Saturn, because that's the planet that's sure to make this native find some way to get married. As I said earlier, this native got married in April 2016. I don't know the exact date of marriage. So let's go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa first. Jupiter Mahadasa is running, Saturn Antardasa is running until 2017 February. So the native got married during the Saturn Antardasa, and the Mars Pratyantardasa is running. And then Sukshmantardasa, we don't need it at this point. So the Mars Pratyantardasa is running. So let's go and look at in April 2016, where are the two transit planets, transit Jupiter and transit Saturn. Transit Jupiter is in Leo, the first house. That means transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on 7th house and the 7th house lord at the same time, because Saturn is the 7th house lord and Saturn is residing in the 7th house. That's the reason why during the Jupiter Mahadasa and Saturn Antardasa, the native got married. And then comes What about Transit Saturn? Transit Saturn is residing in Scorpio, owned by Mars, and Mars is co-joined with natal Jupiter. So that's the reason why you can see that even though the Antardasa is Saturn's Antardasa, it's a Mars Pratyantara Dasa that has activated the ability for this particular native to get married, and the event of the marriage happened during the Mars Pratyantara Dasa. This is the another female example that I want to discuss about when it comes to the analyzing this particular rule. The female was born in 1981 and got married in May 2000. So let's go and first look at this D1 chart just to have a quick look at who is the seventh house lord and what is the position of the seventh house lord. The Lagna is Capricorn, so the Lagnadipati is Saturn. And now from Lagna, the seventh house is Cancer. That's where so the seventh house lord is Moon. So the Lagnadipati is Saturn and the seventh house lord is Moon. Just keep these two as you keep these two in your mind. Then comes in seventh house. What are the planets? They're Rahu and Venus. God. Rahu and Venus. Venus is the fifth house lord and 8, 9, 10th house lord too. And the most important thing that I want to say is there is a Parivartana Yoga between Moon and Venus. That means there is a Parivartana Yoga between the fifth house lord and the seventh house lord. So whenever the transit planets come close to any of these things, that's when there is a high possibility for this particular native to get married. As I said, let's go and see where are the two transit planets, Transit Saturn and Transit Jupiter, somewhere in May 2000. So in May 2000, both Transit Saturn and Transit Jupiter are in Aries. Aries is the fourth house from Rashi Lagna and the seventh house from Chandra Lagna. And remember, we know that this particular native is a female, so we have to look from both Rashi Lagna and Chandra Lagna. Since Transit Jupiter and Transit Saturn are both in the seventh house from Chandra Lagna, that was the time when the native got married. So you can see that the rule clearly justifies that when these two transit planets are in the seventh house from Chandra Lagna, then the native is sure to get married. And let's go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa. The Vimsottari Dasa is wow. Jupiter Mahadasa, Jupiter Antardasa, Jupiter Pratyantara Dasa, and Moon Sukshmantara Dasa. Oh my gosh, that's the beauty of this here. The Jupiter is the 12th house lord, which is the pleasures of bed, and Transit Jupiter is in the 7th house for a moon. And when the Jupiter Moon periods came in Vimsottari Dasa, the native got married. Here is another female chart. The native was born in 1979 in New Jersey, USA, and the date of marriage was June 2007. So let's go and look at the D1 chart. The Lagna is Cancer, so the Lagnadipati is Moon, and Moon is in the 11th house, owned by Venus. Just keep that aside. And then comes because the Lagna is Cancer, the 7th house is Capricorn, and the owner of the 7th house is Saturn. Saturn is in 2nd house from Rashi Lagna and 4th house from Chandra Lagna. This is very important here to see. Okay, the other thing that I want to tell you is Moon is co-joined with Mars in the 11th house from Rashi Lagna. Saturn is co-joined with Rahu in the 2nd house from Rashi Lagna. And if you look at it, this particular native has a Kala Sarpa Yoga or dosha, depending upon whichever way you want to see it. But all the planets are between the axis of Rahu and Ketu. So for this particular native, the marriage was June 2007. So on that day, or you can say it as in June 2007, Transit Jupiter was in Cancer. Oh gosh. And sorry, transit Saturn was in Cancer, I'm sorry, and transit Jupiter is in Scorpio. So transit Saturn in Cancer is the Lagna, the first house. So transit Saturn is having a direct aspect on seventh house, which is owned by natal Saturn. So sure, this particular combination is sure to make this particular native get married. Now let's go and look at the transit Jupiter. Transit Jupiter is in Scorpio, yes, but from Chandra Lagna, because this native is a female, when I looked from Chandra Lagna, Scorpio is the seventh house. That means transit Jupiter is in the seventh house, and and not only that, Scorpio, the old lord of Scorpio is Mars. So transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on Mars, because Mars and Moon, natal Mars and natal Moon, they both are co-joined in the 11th house from Rashi Lagna. So let's go and look at the Vimsotharitasa. In 2007, Jupiter Mahadasa is running. Wow. And at the time of marriage, it is Saturn Antardasa and Saturn Pratyantaradasa. Look at the way how Saturn has initiated this particular event. Natal Saturn is the seventh house lord. That's very important here. Transit Saturn is in the first house, having a direct aspect on the seventh house, and the seventh house owner is natal Saturn. Naturally, Saturn's role is very high here for the native to get married, and because transit Jupiter is in the seventh house from Chandra Lagna, and transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on the seventh house lord Mars, and the Jupiter Mahadasa is running, the event was sure to happen. This is the another female native who was born in June 1993, and the Lagna is again Cancer. That means the seventh house lord is Saturn, and the seventh house lord Saturn is residing in the eighth house from Rashi Lagna, and Saturn is the lord of seventh and eighth houses. That means the seventh house lord is residing in its own house, irrespective of whether it is seventh or eighth. And then comes the Moon. Lagna Adhipati is Moon, and Moon is residing in the second house from Rashi Lagna, and Moon is co-joined with Mars. Okay, that's fine. So this is just the D1 chart. Since Saturn is the seventh house lord, so let's go and try to see where are the two transit planets, Jupiter and Saturn, in July 2015. Transit Jupiter is in Leo, which is the second house from Rashi Lagna, and both Moon and natal Mars are in Leo. That means transit Jupiter is touching natal Moon. That means transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on the seventh house from Chandra Lagna. When you look at the seventh house from Chandra Lagna, Saturn is the owner of that seventh house, and Saturn is residing there. So transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on the seventh house and the seventh house lord Saturn. This is we have seen a similar example in the previous one of the examples had the same situation where transit Jupiter touched natal Moon and natal Moon, and transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on seventh house and the seventh house lord Saturn. For that particular native, I remember that the marriage happened during Saturn Antaradasa and Saturn Pratyantaradasa. But for this native, when you look at the Vimsotthari Dasa, the Mahadasa is Venus running. So we have to figure it out, like, why is Venus doing this part of it? If you look at it, first of all, you look at transit Saturn. Transit Saturn is in Scorpio, so it's having a direct aspect on the house owned by Venus, and it's the Venus Mahadasa that is running. So when transit Jupiter has initiated all the possibility for the event to happen, and it's a natal Saturn, the seventh house, transit Jupiter looking at the seventh house and the seventh house lord natal Saturn. Transit Saturn is looking at the house owned by Venus, and it's the Venus Mahadasa that is running. That's the reason why you see that the native got married during the Venus Mahadasa. And the other parts like Mercury, why did Mercury come into picture? Mercury came into picture because Mercury is the first house lord, Mercury is that third and 12th house lord residing in the first house. That means from Rashi Lagna, Mercury is having a direct, also having a direct aspect on the 7th house. And again, that particular 7th house is again owned by Saturn. Not only that, natal Jupiter is residing in the house owned by Mercury too. So when transit Jupiter has initiated the ability for the native to get married, natal Jupiter, who is residing in the house owned by Mercury, and Mercury which is having a direct aspect on the 7th house owned by Saturn, all these combinations has initiated or gave the ability for the native to get married in July 2015. This is another natal chart. This is a male native who was married in January 1998, born in September 1967. So when you look at the chart, the Lagna is Taurus, so the Lagnadipati is Venus. And from Rashi Lagna, the 7th house lord is Mars, and Mars is residing in 7th house only. And then comes the part is where is from Moon. Usually, because the native is a male, you don't need to look at it, but I just have a quick look at it. Moon is in Aries, and the 7th house from Moon is again the house owned by Venus, the 6th house from Rashi Lagna. So what you can see here is that from Moon, the 7th house lord is Venus. From Rashi Lagna, the 1st house lord is Venus. And when you look at it, Venus is residing in 4th house from Rashi Lagna and 5th house from Chandra Lagna. This is just without seeing anything. This is how the D1 chart looks like. Now the question comes is, how did the native get married in January 1998? First of all, in January 1998, Transit Saturn is in Pisces, co-joined with natal Saturn. That's the first thing you have to say. Second, Transit Jupiter is in Aquarius, owned by Saturn. The house is owned by Saturn. So Transit Jupiter is residing in the house owned by Saturn, and Transit Saturn and the natal Saturn, they both are residing in the house owned by Jupiter. This is very important part to keep in mind. And then comes from the Rashi Lagna, the 7th house lord is Mars, and Mars is residing in its own house, in its 7th house itself. And when you look at it, the Mahadasa, Mars Mahadasa started in 1996. So the Mahadasa is the 7th house lord Mahadasa started. So that tells you that there's a high possibility if the native is of the age, in the marriage age group, in his or her religion or country, then there's a high possibility for the native to get married during the 7th house lord Mahadasa. So there you go. So you can see it is. And then comes the question is, how did it happen? Even though the Mahadasa is just the Antardasa is Jupiter, so you can ask, how did it happen for during Jupiter Antardasa? If you look at it, Transit Jupiter is in Aquarius, and its direct aspect is on Leo, where natal Jupiter is there and natal Venus is there. Remember, the rule says that if Transit Jupiter or Transit Saturn have a direct aspect on natal Venus, then during that period the possibility is very high for the native to get married. Here exactly that's what is happening here with Transit Jupiter having a direct aspect on natal Venus. So you got the Mars Mahadasa, and Jupiter Antardasa is the one when the native got married. If you look at the Pratyantardasa, this is something that's very amazing to see. If you look at the Pratyantardasa, it's in Mercury, and Mercury is directly in the 7th house from both natal Saturn and Transit Saturn. So when you look at it, even the Transit Saturn, even though it is not having a direct aspect on the 7th house or the 7th house lord, it is whatever the planet that owns the house, the 7th house from natal Saturn and Transit Saturn, is Mercury. Mercury is residing in the same house, so that Mercury Pratyantardasa is just initiated the ability for this particular native to get married. Using all the above 7 to 8 examples, I just analyzed the charts based on their birth details and the date of marriage, and then how the rule that I explained in the first part, how the rule worked for these particular natives is what I explained until now. So this concludes the part one, where analysis is being done on the rule that I told earlier. In the next part, what I'm going to do is to take two examples, use this particular rule and do the predictions. So I hope this once the analysis part is understood, it would be easy for you to go to the prediction part and figure it out how the prediction can be done based on by using this particular rule. Earlier, I explained the rule using some of the examples, and that part is called analysis part. The analysis part where we do is to consider the rule and justify why the rule is true. And now, using that analysis part of being justification is completed, here comes the prediction part. So before I using this rule, I'm going to predict the possibility for the two natives when there is a possibility for the two natives to get married. Before I do it, let me reiterate the rule that I'm using here. Whenever transit Saturn or transit Jupiter, whenever transit Saturn or transit Jupiter touches or aspects the seventh house lord, or the natal Venus, then from Rashi Lagna, if it is for the male and female, and from Chandra Lagna, if it is female only. So for male, we look only from the Rashi Lagna. For female, we look from Rashi Lagna and Chandra Lagna. So whenever transit Saturn or transit Jupiter touches or aspects the seventh house lord, or natal Venus, when looked from Rashi Lagna or Chandra Lagna, and there is a cooperation between then the Mahadasa in the Vimshottari Dasara is cooperative also, then there is a possibility for very high for that particular native to get married. So let me go using this rule that we have analyzed earlier. Let me go now and use the same rule to predict, do the predictions for the possibility of two natives. When is it possible for the two natives to get married? Okay, now let's go and look at this unmarried female chart. If you look at this chart, transit Saturn is in the 10th house until December 2019, 12, 11, 10. And transit Jupiter is in the 8th house until September 2018. So what's the problem? What could happen is, when transit Saturn is having a direct aspect on the seventh house lord or the seventh house, then there is a possibility. Now let's go and see who is the seventh house lord. The seventh house lord is Mercury from Rashi Lagna, and the seventh house lord is Sun from Chandra Lagna, and transit Saturn is having a direct aspect on both of them. So this, according to the rule, there is a possibility for this native to get married while transit Saturn is there until December 2019. So before December 2019, we can say that this native can get married, this female native. Now let's go and look at the transit Jupiter. Transit Jupiter will be in the 8th house until September, and then it will move to 9th house. Remember, when it is moves to the 9th house, it's going to touch Saturn. But the other thing that it does, from transit Jupiter is going to have a direct aspect on Venus. Right now, until September 2018, transit Jupiter is having a direct aspect on natal Jupiter. From September 2018, transit Jupiter will have a direct aspect on Venus. That's the reason why I said here is that there's a possibility for this particular NATO to get married while transit Jupiter is in 6th house before September 2018, but the possibility increases once it moves to Scorpio, from where it's going to have a direct aspect on Venus. And now that we know that the possibility exists, let's go and look at the Vimsottari Dasa. Saturn Mahadasa is running. Look, Saturn Mahadasa is running. Saturn is the 12th house lord. Okay, whether you look from Rashi Lagna or Chandra Lagna, Saturn is the 12th house lord, pleasures of bed. And then from until December 2018, it's the Saturn Antardasa again. So transit Saturn is having a direct aspect on the 7th house lord, whether you look from Chandra Lagna or Rashi Lagna. Natal Saturn is the 12th house lord, whether you look from Chandra Lagna or Rashi Lagna, and Saturn Mahadasa and Saturn Antardasa is running. All this tells you that there is a high possibility for this particular NATO to get married before December 2018. Now let's go and look at this unmarried male natives chart. Let me start with the Vimsottari Dasa first, because that's very peculiar here. The Vimsottari Dasa, the Mahadasa is Mercury, the Antardasa is Venus, and the Pratyantara Dasa is again Venus until September 2018. So, and before September 2018, the period is Mercury, Venus, Venus. When you look at it, Mercury is the which house lord? Mercury is the 12th house lord from Rashi Lagna. That's something that you have to look at it. And also, Mercury is the 12th house lord from Chandra Lagna. So, like I said for the female NATO earlier, the 12th house lord Mahadasa is running. That is very, very important here. Whenever there is a 12th house house or the 7th house lord Mahadasa is running, second, 4th, 7th or 12th house Mahadasas are running, the chances, there is a possibility for the NATO to get married based upon, then you have to just look at the age of the NATO and the social and economic conditions, environment of that NATO to say whether the possibility is high or not. For this particular NATO who is residing in India, because the NATO is around 30 years old, the possibility is very high to get married before September 2018. Now, let's see how the rules, the two rules that I mentioned in this, let's see, try to predict based upon the two rules. First and foremost, transit Saturn. Transit Saturn is in Sagittarius until December 2019. Wow. Transit Saturn is touching the natal Venus. Venus is the natural Karaka for marriage, so the rule is valid here. Transit Saturn is touching Venus, so the possibility is high. Next, transit Jupiter will be in Libra until September 2018, and then it goes to Scorpio, where it is going to touch the natal Saturn. Remember, natal Saturn is the 7th house lord from Rashi Lagna. So, when it touches the natal Saturn, the 7th house lord, transit Jupiter in somewhere in September, August, September, something like that, the possibility is very high. The reason why I said it is very high before September is because transit Jupiter will be in Rashi Sandhi between August and September of 2018. That means during this Rashi Sandhi, it is going to touch the 7th house lord Saturn, and the Vimsottari Dasa is very, very cooperative. So something positive when it comes to the event of getting married is sure to happen before September 2018.
Thank you very much for viewing this video. In this video presentation, I had clearly mentioned that the rule is very simple. Whenever you see two transit Jupiter and transit Saturn in the natal chart, see where they are. If they are on the 7th house or the 7th touching the 7th house lord, or having an aspect on the 7th house or 7th house lord or natal Venus. These are the 5 conditions. 7th touching or aspecting the 7th house, touching or aspecting the 7th house lord, touching or aspecting the natal Venus. Then check the Vimsottari Dasa, and if the Vimsottari Mahadasa and the Antaradasa are cooperative, then there is a high possibility for that particular native to get married during that period. I hope you like this presentation, and feel free to let me know if you have any other topics that you would like to discuss or have a presentation in the similar fashion. Thank you very much.